Well, last episode you saw me make these seat covers, and today I've got the curtains in my sight. I'll try and insert a couple of pictures here from when the caravan was brand new, and you can see that the decoration is not at all offensive. It's very calm, but I want to try and inject a bit of dynamism and colour in here and see if we can make this a little bit more jazzy, and also alongside that try and modernize ever so slightly the net curtains, because there's nothing offensive, it's just a bit twee with those extra bits of color on. So I'm going to try and get something that's a bit more modernist, and I completely appreciate that this is entirely my taste, so a good proportion of you will absolutely hate what I'm going to do and another proportion may well love it. So anyway, let's get into the video. There are a few Ariba owners watching these days, so here's what the ends of these curtain rails look like. So there's one of these stoppers on each end of the last runner that sits within the rail itself. So they look like this. That's the one straight off the end, and then once I've pulled off one of the curtain, they're called tabs, then I'll be able to get the other one out and the whole thing will come out. There you go. And as you know, these aren't really curtains, these are just bits of fabric for show. Ah, that's the one out of the netting as well. So there you go, not really curtains, all tied together to try and keep the pleats in place, so just for show. You can see that the pleats are held taut by a couple of stitches and some very posh things that look like tie wraps, and then there are these curtain runners. And this is the Ariba specific ones, and then they just go into the header tape and then slot into the track profile that's screwed up to the cabinetry. And these nets are the same, so you can see some perfect pleats in them, and it's not because I've been stood here getting them pleated to exactly the correct position, it's because they're stitched like that. And although that keeps them very tidy, and it means it's impossible to see in here from the outside, which is very good because it's such a small caravan. It's so easy to see inside when they're not in place. I do actually quite like having the nets in place. It just makes it a little bit more private. But those pleats mean there's an awful lot of fabric in front of the window. So what I'm going to do when I replace these is actually to have them sheer and straight. So just have a single bit of fabric, and I'll sacrifice a little bit of privacy, but I think those pleats and the amount of fabric and the thickness of these nets means it's quite dark in here, so I'm hoping it'll be a lot lighter when I swap these over. So you can see removing these curtain hooks is simply a matter of undoing the sort of latch bit and then unthreading it, and there's our bit of fabric that'll give us something to measure with. Alright, so here we are back in the kitchen, and I'm actually going to make lined curtains. I've managed to find some blackout thermal lining that's relatively flexible and lightweight, so I figured if I'm going to make curtains I might as well make them lined and actually usable. So there's going to be much more fabric than there was before. Well, not actually that much more, because I'm not going to pleat them, so they're going to be straight panels of fabric when they're drawn, but they are going to be drawable, unlike those just decorative pieces that were on there before. So hopefully they won't look too bulky with this flexible background in place. So making curtains should be a relatively simple affair. All you're effectively trying to do is make a tube if they're lined curtains, and then fold it flat, get your edges, your seams equal, and then fold over the top, sew on some header tape, check the length and hem that up. I'm going to leave the bottoms open because I think they tend to hang better that way. I think some people might fold them in, but I'm going to leave mine open. Some of you may have spotted a problem I've made for myself here. Obviously, by choosing this pattern fabric, then I need to cut it very, very carefully to make sure the pattern joins up, because otherwise it's going to drive me absolutely bonkers when the curtains are closed and I don't have horizontal lines in the correct place. So that's fine for all the slimmer windows, so the windows where I can cut two curtains from a single piece of the fabric, and I think this fabric is 115 centimeters wide, so not particularly wide. So this is okay for the smaller windows, but when it comes to that big front window in a minute, I'm going to have to cut 2 pieces and then match the pattern up and make sure that when it's drawn, those inside edges are in exactly the correct place. Anyway, that's the complicated bit for later on. The simple curtains will get done first. I could make these exactly the same length as the show curtains, the false curtains that were here before, but the problem is if I do that, I'm concerned that there might actually be a gap at the bottom. So I'll lay these by the side and then just pin the bottoms into place, and then we'll go and put them in the caravan in a moment and just check exactly where that lays to make sure it's in the right place. Right, so here's our pinned edge. Let's get a couple of curtain hooks on and then we can get this thing up. So just slot the hook through the loop on the header tape and then clip it closed, and then we just need to slide it into the T-track, which is the curtain track. I'll pop a few more of these on and then I'll show you what it looks like. There's not many hooks, but it should be enough to allow me to get this thing straight and just check where the hem should be. Now you know I show you the bad bits as well as the good bits on this channel, and straight away you can spot a mistake, can't you? Look at the top there, look at the gap between the track and the curtain. I've clearly put the tape far too low. I thought I'd measured carefully against this fake, but now it's pulled across. That is clearly not workable, is it? It looks horrible. So before I measure for the hem, I need to get that right, so I'm going to go in and fix that, and then we'll measure for the hem again, probably tomorrow. Right, header tape fixed, here we go again. And these lights are an absolute pain in the neck, so let's unslot those and that'll make life much easier. Now it's looking much better at the top, isn't it? Good. Actually, this length is okay, and I'm going to have to tuck them behind these cushions because annoyingly the cushions are actually higher than the window, which makes life a little bit awkward. Yeah, it's going to have to go there because that is just fractionally lower than the end of the blind mechanism. I've popped the net curtain out of here, so let's just double check this without a net and see what it looks like. I haven't worried too much about visible stitching at the top and the bottom on these because I think it blends in well enough. What I have done, as you can see, is worry about the pattern matching. One down, 3 small ones, and the front window to go. Okay, now it's time to cut the front curtains, which are a single very wide window across the front of the caravan. So I can't get both curtains out of a single strip of the fabric, so I've had to cut one piece after the other from across the roll, and I've had to allow for the length of the repeating pattern on the curtain of the fabric itself. So what I did was cut much more than I needed, make sure I've got the lines, the horizontal lines lined up, and then cut the tops and the bottoms to make sure I've got them in exactly the correct place, so that when they're closed we've got that repeating pattern happening perfectly. Now, this is not just the most complicated pair of curtains because you can't cut them from a single strip because of how wide they are, but also because of the slope. They attach at both the top and the bottom, so they've got a runner at the top and a runner at the bottom. So a moment ago I just went out to the caravan with all the tops and the sides done and measured precisely where the bottom needs to go, and the bottom needs another one of those header tapes on it so that it can have loops on the bottom which attach around a bit of I guess net curtain wire to enable the bottom to slide across while the top stays in a normal track. The eagle-eyed amongst you will have spotted a bit of footage out of order here, in that you can see there is a new rather straight net curtain already fitted, and I'll show you how I did that in a minute. But for now I'm going to check that this front curtain fits, and fingers crossed I've got all the header tapes in the correct place. I don't know if you can just about make out that white net curtain cable that's running across the bottom of the window just on top of this front shelf. That's the bit I need to attach the lower header tape to in a minute, using those loops that look a bit like tie wraps. Anyway, the top fits normally, so let's get that bit in first and then I'll clip the lower bits on. So I cheated. Did you spot? I undid the net curtain because it's just got hooks on each end and just threaded it through. That seemed a lot easier than trying to clip each piece over. I was a bit concerned that this was too tight, but actually I think it's spot on. Phew! And despite the extra fabric here, these things seem to take up about the same space as the old, just fake ones, which is great. I'm going to put a tie back on, and again I'll show you a bit later in the video how I made those. Now then, before we get to the proper nets, I want to talk a little bit about mistakes, and personally I think this is really important, because of course, you know, there are all those cliches about, oh, you only learn from mistakes, or mistakes are proof that you're trying, or all that sort of stuff. Anyway, but you know, dear old Einstein, anyone who has never made a mistake has never tried anything new. And that's exactly what all these makes and mod projects are all about. All about trying to create something new that didn't exist before. And of course, with social media, it's so easy to edit what we do and only show the end results and make everything look perfect. But you know, in case anybody is inspired to give something a go as a result of tuning into this little mini series of videos, I want to show you my mistakes, because that's real life, you know, and that's what this channel is all about, real life. Anyway, this footage is a case in point, of course. I saw these voile panels and I thought that they looked absolutely great, you know. In the pictures it was a grey stripe on a very crisp, nice Arctic white background, and they look super modern. But once they were finished off and the same length as the old ones and then hung in the caravan, they looked terrible. You know, nothing wrong with the fabric itself, of course, it would have looked great somewhere else. Just in here it looked totally wrong. It's probably something to do with the creamy walls or the slightly orange wood itself. So, you know, this was a case of taking a deep breath, having a cup of tea, remembering back to the original vision for the look itself, and then trying again. So, you know, don't be afraid of mistakes. They're how we learn. Nobody's perfect, although they might look that way, and certainly don't be afraid to start again instead of pressing on if you've identified a problem. Anyway, back to the proper nets. These nets are actually much simpler to make than the curtains themselves, so perhaps I should have talked about that first, but anyway, here we are. The difficulty with the nets is getting the tension set right on the sewing machine, but you can easily find out about how to do that in the manual of your sewing machine, or indeed there are loads of videos online for how to do that, so I won't talk about that. Plus, I don't think I'm a very good tutor of that anyway, because I tend to just go by experiment myself. So I managed to find these net curtains. I couldn't find the fabric I wanted. It was really difficult to find exactly what I wanted, so a sort of modern plain white. But this has a very subtle sort of slight linen weave in it, and although it feels a little bit rough, it actually looks wonderful. So it's absolutely straight white with this very slight weave in it, which adds a little bit of modern interest, and I think this is going to look really good in the caravan, especially nicely contrasting it against the white in the curtain panels that I made earlier. So as I said, I couldn't buy this as fabric, so I bought it as a curtain and then unpicked the seams from that to give me the size panels I needed. And I decided that this was so lightweight that rather than making 2 panels per window, I'd actually just make 1, because it's easy to pull back to one side or the other and then to gather it up if we don't want the nets in place. But it looks a whole lot tidier with just 1 sheer panel down. And as I said, we do tend to leave them down because it's such a small caravan. It doesn't feel that private when you're inside if you've got all the windows and all the curtains open, because wherever you are, you're not far away from one of the external walls. So to make these nets, it's a very simple case of just turning over and hemming all the edges and doing that as neatly as possible so that all the seams are nice and flat. And then each top will have to have a bit of header tape, and I can use the same 2.5 centimeter or 1 inch header tape that I used on the curtains themselves. And then just check them in the caravan, check for length to make sure it's consistent with the grey curtains, and then we'll head to the caravan and slide them in and see what they look like. Now the trick here to get a really good finish on them is to make sure that the symmetrical seams are the same size. So you've seen that the seams on the edges I've done is about 1 centimeter, and I've rolled the fabric over twice so that all the slightly frayed edges are totally sealed with inside the seam. So each of the sides has this 1 centimeter seam on it, and the top and the bottom I've got it 2.5 centimeters, so that that's nice and consistent. Now I haven't put any additional weight in these because they're such small curtains. I think they'll hang okay on their own, and hopefully the weight of just that 2.5 centimeter lower seam will help it to hang nice and straight. And then by getting them matching, so the top at the same distance as the bottom, it'll look super neat. And in a minute we'll come to the large panel for the single front window, and that needs to have a bit of tape on the bottom as well, because it needs to be secured at the base, because as you know the front window is sloped. So I'll show you how I do that in a moment. Okay, test fit time. The curtains on this side are only accessible from this far right hand end, so I've got to remember to put all the slider stops in the correct order, otherwise we're going to be in trouble in a minute. Go, what do you think? Alright, last couple of little jobs and then I'll show you around the whole finished thing. So I want to make some tie backs just to give these a little bit of a finished look, and I found these really cool buttons that I'm going to use. I don't want fabric tie backs, so I've got this elastic cord, and I'm simply going to thread it through the buttons, make a loop and with a knot on the end, and then just fold that around the curtains to keep them tied up together. This first one is a bit of an experiment, of course. I need to work out what sort of knot to use and how long to make this elastic. So I'll just keep it long, I'll do a sort of reef knot on the end here, see if that works. I'll just test it on a curtain and adjust from there until I get the perfect setup, and then I can go into a sort of production line. So let me just try this out on the curtain. Okay, way too long, so let's undo and redo the knot and try again. Correct length, but I think the ears of that spare elastic are going to stick out too much, so I'll just chop them off and try again. But I think I might swap to an overhand knot rather than a reef knot. That might be a bit more secure as well. Let's just double check that. So yeah, length perfect, but I'm going to swap to an overhand knot, which will be a bit more secure and will hopefully keep it hidden nicely behind the button. And then that's it. So I'm just going to cut all these pieces of elastic that I need to size, sort of mass production style. I'm just going to do one size of tie back because the curtains aren't that different in amount of material from each other, so I think they'll be fine with the same size tie backs, and otherwise it'll just get excessively complicated. And with the stretch that this elastic's got, I think it'll look fine anyway. I think it'll mould itself to the size it needs to be. Right, let's take a closer look at one of these installed, because I realise I haven't actually showed you yet. So, sorry for the mess and the copious amounts of tea in here. Oh, and the untidy curtain. But that's what one of the originals looked like, and you can see its ears are sticking out. So even with it trimmed off, that needs a bit of a tidy. But they're cool buttons, aren't they? And if I could do some good camera work, I'm sure you'd appreciate it. There we are. So with the ears trimmed off, it looks much nicer. Anyway, let's get the rest of these finished off, and then I'll show you what I'm going to do with that great big front window net, and then we'll be ready for the grand tour. Last little job, and that's to secure this front net, which I put a piece of that header tape in at the bottom to give me options on how I secure that. Originally what I thought I might do is run 2 lengths of that net wire across the front here, but that just looks ugly, so I had another little clever idea, because of course the main net wire is now occupied by the actually functional curtains instead of just the ones for show. So I've got these little hooks which I use for the fairy lights at the back, and I'm going to put one of these on each side of the frame of the blind itself, and I'm going to put one on the shelf right down in the middle directly underneath the blind, and then just make some little loops from elastic, and I'll be able to just put a loop through the curtain tape on the net itself and then just hook it closed in 3 different places, and hopefully that should hold it tight enough, because I've got those rail stoppers on the top that keep the top of the net nicely taut. Right, let's give you guys a close-up of this. Can you see clearly? Yeah, looks like it. So I've just cut a short length of that cord elastic, and I'm just going to pop it through the header tape, and then just tie a little knot off. Try and do it neatly, and then the sort of ears outside the knot will actually give me a bit of a handle, because can you see the clear clip that I've put in there? I'm just going to loop it over like this, and I'm going to do the same on the other side and one in the middle, and then we'll be nice and finished. Okay, here we go. Excuse the slight mess in here, we're just back from a trip. So there's all the nets all the way around and the curtains on the side, and yeah, these nets are working a lot better than the old ones that had those pleats in them. So it is lighter in here. Actually, it's much nicer in here because you can see out much more easily. Obviously, it's sacrificed a little bit of privacy, but hardly anything really. So yeah, really pleased with them. I decided not to put any tie backs around those front curtains because they were looking fine, just pulled down taut on that little cable at the bottom. And that reminds me, I need to try and sort out that blind as well. Looks like something snapped inside because the dealership couldn't manage to fix it just by winding the elastics, so looks like we'll need a new one, which is a bit annoying. But yeah, really happy with it. Anyway, thanks so much to you guys for tuning in. Wonderful to have your company. Do the usual thumbs up and subscribe and all that sort of jazz. And I guess until the next time, it's bye for now. So see ya. Bye.